for 5 minutes. Mr. Ivey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Hur, appreciate you coming in today. I did want to deal with one preliminary matter, which is the issue of the release of the transcript. I've heard complaints from my Republican colleagues about the White House only releasing the transcript from the Biden interview this morning. But I have to note that there are, I think, over 90 transcripts that are being held by the majority here in the Judiciary Committee and Oversight Committee for interviews that we all care about. They all go directly to issues with respect to the alleged impeachment inquiry. You know, it's kind of the pot calling the kettle black, it seems to me, as an understatement. So I noted too that when the ranking member requested the majority release the transcripts, the chairman objected. So I hope that we can move forward in the mode of cooperation and sharing information. I think it's just reasonable to do. Mr. Hur, I wanted to thank you again for the work you did. I don't agree with everything you wrote in the report, but that's the nature of the business, I think. But I did want to ask you about this. I know you started off with, in the first line executive summary, we conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter. And I take it that's still your position today.
Yes, it is.
All right. You also noted a little bit below that, for the reasons summarized below, we conclude that the evidence does not establish Mr. Biden's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. You still share that, still hold that view?
I do.
Okay, and even though you objected to the use of the word exonerated, from your perspective, he's been cleared of all criminal charges in your investigation. Is that fair?
I determined that based on the evidence, criminal charges are not warranted.
Okay, and I did want to go to the issue of material distinctions that you raised in your report between President Biden and former President Trump. We've got a document up here that lays some of it out, and you've answered some questions about this already, but you know, I think it seemed to be highly relevant in your analysis that President Biden cooperated, and I wanted to walk through a couple of those points. One is that he turned in classified documents to the National Archives and to the Department of Justice upon request. Is that fair?
That was a factor that we considered, yes, Congressman.
All right, he cooperated with your investigation?
Yes.
Consented to the search of multiple locations, including his house?
Correct.
Sat for a voluntary interview?
Yes.
And that was 5 hours over 2 days?
A little over 5 hours over 2 days.
Okay. Turned over and allowed investigators to review handwritten notebooks he believed to be his personal property?
Correct.
Now, with respect to the comparison with former President Trump, and I believe this is on page 11, which is still in your executive summary. And I'll just read part of this to you. Unlike the evidence involving Mr. Biden, the allegations set forth in the indictment of Mr. Trump, if proven, would present serious aggravating facts. Most notably, after being given multiple chances to return classified documents and avoid prosecution, Mr. Trump allegedly did the opposite. According to the indictment, he not only refused to return the documents for many months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and then to lie about it. In contrast, Mr. Biden turned in classified documents to the National Archives and the Department of Justice, consented to the search of multiple locations, including his homes, sat for a voluntary interview, and in other ways cooperated with his investigation. That's from page 11 of your report?
I see that language on page 11.
All right, and you still stand by that language?
I do, sir.
Okay. And this is this is your report. You take full responsibility for everything that's in the document?
I do. I stand by every word in it.
All right. All right. Wanted to ask you a couple of questions. One is with respect to the surprising line of questions you got right before we broke about guardianship, which seems to me like a dramatic stretch of the anything that was remotely involved in your report. Did you raise any kind of issues about Mr. Biden needing guardianship or anything along those lines?
Nothing relating to guardianship appeared in my report.
Okay. And so I guess you made the one point about him being an elderly man with poor memory, but are you saying did you say anywhere in your report that you thought not only would he be unfit to handle his own finances, but he'd be unfit for public office?
My report did not include any opinions on those issues.
Okay, I see my time is exhausted, but thank you again for your testimony. I appreciate your efforts.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Yield to the chairman briefly.
I think the gentleman for yielding, I'm just pointing out Mr. Ivey raised the issue of transcripts. He has complete access to every transcript that we have done in a congressional investigation. He can go, he could show up for all the depositions, like frankly, I show up for most of those. So he has complete access to that. What we don't have is access to the transcripts of all the witnesses. We only have Mr. Biden, and we don't have access to the audio tapes of all the witnesses, which is
Will
what
the
we're
gentleman
seeking.
yield?
It's not my time. I yield back to the gentleman from Virginia.
You're speaking, but it's not your time?
It's my time.
You yield it to me.
All right.
I thank the gentleman. Special Counsel Hur, thank you for being here. Your story is an impressive one. Your achievements are impressive as well. You've been a prosecutor for many years, correct?
Yes, sir.
I was not a prosecutor for more than a couple of years, but I still remember my record in jury trials. Do you remember your record?
It'll take me a little time to reconstruct, but I think I could get there.
Is it above 500?
It is above 500, yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I'm curious because the evidence that you outline in your report is pretty significant when it comes to evidence that after his vice presidency, and I'm reading from your report, Mr. Biden willfully retained marked classified documents about Afghanistan and unmarked classified handwritten notes in his notebooks, both of which he stored in unsecured places in his home. Further, you noted that there's evidence that he willfully retained the classified Afghanistan documents, including the Thanksgiving memo, and had a strong motive to keep such classified documents. You outline what that motive is. Can you tell me what is the motive for keeping the Thanksgiving Day memo?
One of the motives that we addressed in the report was that the issue of whether or not a troop surge should be sent to Afghanistan in 2009 was a hotly contested and debated issue within the Obama administration back in 2009, and one in which then Vice President Biden had a significant role, and he felt very strongly about.
I'm going to quote from your report. President Biden believed President Obama's 2009 troop surge was a mistake on par with Vietnam and wanted the record to show that he was right about Afghanistan, that his critics were wrong, and that he had opposed President Obama's mistaken decision forcefully when it was made, that his judgment was sound when it mattered most. Does that sound correct?
That language sounds familiar from the report, yes.
Okay. That is pretty significant in terms of a motivating factor for retaining those documents, wouldn't you say?
That would be a factor that a jury would assess in considering whether or not Mr. Biden had criminal intent.
And I also know that President Biden was working with a ghostwriter on a book, Mark Zwanecker, correct?
Correct.
And your investigation concluded when President Biden began work on his memoir, correct? At what time did your investigation conclude?
With respect to the second book published in 2017, we identified evidence that Mr. Biden began recorded conversations with Mr. Zwanitzer in 2016 before the end of Mr. Biden's vice presidency.
And it's your understanding that while Mr. Zwanecker interviewed President Biden, he read classified information from his notebooks nearly verbatim, sometimes for an hour or more at a time, correct?
Correct.
And was Mr. Zwanetter authorized to receive this classified information?
He was not.
And in fact, in their February 16th meeting, which has been alluded to earlier, isn't it true that President Biden read aloud and nearly verbatim classified information regarding the actions and views of U.S. military leaders and the CIA director relating to the foreign country and a foreign terrorist organization?
I believe that occurred, that was captured in a recording later in 2017, I believe in April of 2017, not February.
Okay. And Mr. Zwanetter became aware of your appointment as special counsel, correct?
At some point, Mr. Zwanitzer did become aware of my appointment, yes.
And upon learning of the investigation, Mr. Zwanetter deleted digital audio recordings of his conversations with Mr. Biden during the writing of the book, Promise Me, Dad.
Correct.
Did investigators with your office interviewed Mr. Zwanetter about the deleted recordings, and he admitted that part of his motivation for deleting this recording was because he was aware there was an investigation, correct?
Correct.
And did this conduct raise concerns with your office?
It did. We considered it to be significant evidence that we needed to follow up on.
Significant evidence, and I would argue that you also had significant evidence surrounding the retention of these documents, the storage of these documents, and even though there was a bit of a disconnect between what a reasonable juror could conclude the intent was there, the motive was there for the book, for exoneration, and I would argue that you had enough to move forward. My time has expired. I yield back.
Gentlelady from Vermont is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Special Counsel Hur, for being here today. I know it's been hours and hours, and I really appreciate you staying to the bitter end here. And I think it speaks to the possibility and promise afforded by this nation that you, as a child of immigrants, sit here as special counsel, and I, as a child of an immigrant, sit here as a member of Congress. There is a lot that's been said today, and part of the challenge that I have is trying to translate this for my constituents back home. And so I want to start with sort of the top line. So you were tasked with identifying whether criminal conduct occurred regarding classified documents. And after over a year of investigation, including 150 witness interviews and over 7 million documents reviewed, you wrote in the first sentences of the executive summary, quote, "We conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter. We would reach the same conclusion even if Department of Justice policy did not foreclose criminal charges against a sitting president." Were those your words?
Yes.
Thank you. So let's get into it. Mr. Hur, at any time did DOJ leadership or the Attorney General attempt to influence the outcome of your investigation?
No.
Do you believe it's important that the special counsel investigations or any DOJ investigation be impartial and free of influence from political actors?
Yes.
Do you believe you were independent and thorough in your report?
Yes.
Do you think it's true that you received no pressure from Attorney General Garland in this matter?
That's correct.
Is it true that you had all of the resources that you needed enabled for you to conduct your interviews, to conduct your investigation, and to complete your report?
Yes.
Is it true that you recommended that the Attorney General decline to charge President Biden?
I submitted a report to the Attorney General explaining my decision that criminal charges were not warranted in this matter.
Right, so you said on page 1 of the report, quote, "We conclude that the evidence does not establish Mr. Biden's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt." Is it true that your report ultimately concluded that the evidence did not support a finding beyond a reasonable doubt that President Biden willfully retained classified materials?
Yes.
Is it true that President Biden cooperated with your investigation?
Yes.
Is it true that President Biden sat for an interview with you the day after the October 7th attacks in Israel in the midst of an international crisis?
He sat for interviews over 2 days, October 8th and October 9th.
Thank you. Is it true that that President Biden allowed the FBI to conduct thorough searches of his home and his beach house?
Yes.
Is it true that your report found multiple possible innocent explanations as to why the classified documents ended up where they did?
As part of our analysis, we walked through a number of different explanations that defense counsel could present at trial if this case were charged.
And as you said on page 6 of your report, quote, "In addition to this shortage of evidence, there are other innocent explanations for the documents that we cannot refute." Your report reads—
I see that language, yes.
Thank you. Your report reads, "With one exception, there is no record of the Department of Justice prosecuting a former president or vice president for mishandling classified documents from his own administration. The exception is former President Trump." Am I reading that correctly?
Yes.
Is it true, or is it correct that your report recommends no charges and that that would be the case even if he were not a sitting president?
Correct.
So what we've had today is hour after hour after hour of trying to distract us from the clear statements that come through this report. And you yourself have said multiple times today, there was no attempt to obstruct justice by the President, by the Department of Justice, by the Attorney General, that you had all the resources that you needed to conduct a fair and thorough investigation and report, and that what you concluded was, in fact, the evidence was not sufficient to bring charges against the President for mishandling documents. I thank you for being here today. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I'll yield to you such time as you may consume, sir.
Oh, I appreciate the gentleman yielding. Mr. Hur, why did the White House lawyers go look in the first place? My understanding is they went to the Penn Biden Center. Why'd they go look in the first place?
My
I mean, look for
understanding-
classified, mishandling of classified, look for classified documents. Why'd they do it?
What we identified through our investigation was that at a certain date, members of the president's staff went to the Penn Biden Center in order to get a better handle on what the information, what kinds of evidence and what kinds of materials were at the Penn Biden Center.
Were they specifically looking for potential documents that were classified, or was it a broader initial look?
My understanding is that it was a broader initial look, and I'm looking at Chapter 14, page 257 of my report about a visit in
Right.
March 2021 to the Penn Biden Center.
Okay. In March.
In March of 2021.
And was this after the Justice Department began their investigation into President Trump?
I confess I don't have the date of the beginning of the investigation into President Trump at hand, Chairman.
I believe it was the same month. I mean, I believe it was after, so I was just curious of that. Now, one other thing I think is important for folks to understand is President Biden had this information everywhere. I mean, you said they initially went to the Penn Biden Center. Which location was it at? Do you remember when they initially did their look? Was it at the transition office? Was it at the temporary Penn Biden Center in Chinatown? Or was that at its current location where the Penn Biden Center currently sits here in, final location, I guess, in D.C.? You remember?
I believe the visit that I referenced in March 2021 that's described on page 257 was to the Penn Biden Center's permanent and current location.
Permanent and current. So there were three places, those three places classified information was at. Is that fair to say?
That's correct. The initial transition office, immediately after the end of the vice presidency, the Penn Biden Center's temporary office, and then the Penn Biden Center's permanent office.
Okay. So those, and then you had the University of Delaware Library, the University of Delaware Biden Center, right? So that's 5 total. And then you had multiple places in his home.
Correct.
The garage, the den, the office upstairs, and the office downstairs.
Correct.
So what is that? That's like 9 different places.
I've lost count, sir, but
Yeah,
that sounds right.
It's everywhere. And it was documents over a 50-year time frame. And then by comparison, because the Democrats want to keep comparing to President Trump's classified documents right at his home, with Secret Service protection. I don't know that they're anywhere else, were they?
I'm not aware of other locations,
Yeah.
President.
I think that's an important distinction. I would yield back to the gentleman for South Carolina. Appreciate him yielding.
Thank you, Chairman. Briefly, I know we've got 2 minutes left, but Mr. Hur, how would you define willful?
With respect to the intent of willfulness, what a jury has to conclude is that someone knew that their conduct was illegal when they engaged in that conduct.
Right, it's intentional, right? It's not by accident. It's not accidental or involuntary.
Correct.
Okay, so here's where I disagree with your portion of the report on willful, is that you have a gentleman who served 36 years in the Senate. I've only been here a year, but I understand the importance of handling classified information. He served 8 years as vice president. In 2010, it came to the attention of the vice president's staff that classified briefing books had not been returned. Even if they were returned, some of the content was missing. The same year, the executive secretary raised that nearly 30 of the classified briefing books from the first 6 months of 2010 were missing. In August of that year, then Vice President Biden failed to return top secret, sensitive compartmented information contents of a classified briefing book from a trip that he took to the Hamptons. And to date, you were unable to determine if these documents were ever recovered. Is that correct?
Correct.
So to me, this wasn't. When does willfulness when does willfulness factor in? Is it now in his diminished mental capacity, or is it then when he was serving as senator and vice president?
A jury would be assessing President Biden's mental state and his intent, or whether or not he had willfulness at the time that the conduct was committed.
Correct, and I think everyone can kind of plainly see the transgression or the difference between then candidate Biden or Vice President Biden and what is going on now. And so this is where I go to it. As the chairman talked about it in his opening comments, he had 8 million reasons to hold these documents. In fact, he disclosed some of this information to his ghostwriter. And so I think that there could have been willfulness. And I think, I've got 10 seconds left, but look, since 2016, there have been 3 candidates to run for president. All three have had allegations of issues surrounding the retention and holding of classified documents. But Mr. Hur, only one of them has been charged, and that's President Trump. And that's why people think and view this as a two-tiered system of justice. Thank you, sir.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from, Sheila, you have unanimous consent?
Yeah, I'll wait. Let him go ahead.
Gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Buck.
Thank you.
Mr. Hur, they say they save the best for last, so I'm looking forward to this opportunity. First of all, what I've observed in this hearing is that one side thinks you're trying to get President Trump elected, and the other side thinks you're trying to get President Biden elected. I served as a prosecutor for 25 years. I know that you're going to take grief from both sides. You must be doing a great job in your report and during your investigation if you have convinced both sides that you are somewhere in the middle. I commend you for your background. I would have loved to have met Chief Justice Rehnquist. What a hero to conservatives and really Americans, and that must have been a great opportunity for you. But when both sides attack you, my admonition is welcome to Congress. How many, I do have a question, and it goes along the lines of what Mr. Armstrong and Mr. Fry were asking you earlier. I'm really confused about willfulness and your view of willfulness. It's clear to me that at the time, Vice President Biden knew he had classified documents. He told his, after he left the vice presidency, he told his biographer, ghostwriter, those classified documents are in the basement. So he had the mental state that he had classified documents. He also knew that his basement was not a SCIF. It is not a secure area. And so at the point, if at that point in time he said, oh my gosh, I've got to call the archivist, I've got to call Secret Service somebody and get these documents taken away, perhaps he has this defense of acting as quickly as he knew about the documents. But I don't see where the willfulness is missing when he had those two. The element's pretty clear. He possessed classified documents. He held them in a non-secure area, and he did so knowingly. He knew he had classified documents in an unsecure area. Where is the willfulness missing?
Well, sir, prosecutor to prosecutor, I certainly agree with you that the evidence in the form of the audio recorded statement where the president said to his ghostwriter, I just found all the classified stuff downstairs, that is evidence that that any prosecutor would present as significant evidence in a case if this went to trial. And reasonable jurors might well infer that President Biden formed criminal intent based on that piece of evidence. But what we did in our report was to try to walk through exhaustively. You know well as a prosecutor, you need to assess with a very cold eye the strengths of your case and the weaknesses of your case, and try to anticipate arguments that defense counsel might well present at trial. And what we tried to do in our report was to walk through potential arguments that would be presented by defense lawyers at the president's trial, and to determine how, by our judgment, how jurors would receive and perceive the evidence presented, including but not limited to evidence relating to the president's memory gaps that were in various pieces of evidence that we assessed.
So how do you overcome that recording where he says, I've got classified documents? He's 30 years in the Senate or whatever it is. He obviously knows how he has to treat classified documents. I've got classified documents in the basement. What is the defense to that? That it was a made-up recording? That it wasn't his voice? That everyone was wrong? How do you defend that particular fact, as well as I did a lot of tax cases. You had to prove a pattern of conduct. And in this case, he had a lot of documents in a lot of places. How do you overcome those things?
Yes, Congressman. So we walk through a number of different evidentiary gaps that reasonable jurors might focus on, as well as a number of different defense arguments that the president's defense lawyers could present at trial. The first is a theory or an argument to the jury that the president, yes, he did say to his ghostwriter, I just found all the classified stuff downstairs, but then soon thereafter forgot about the documents. And therefore, it would be difficult to convince a jury that actually he willfully, he knew that it was illegal to keep the documents and he continued to do so. A second argument that we considered is that perhaps these documents never actually were in Virginia in his private rental home there. Perhaps the documents were there by virtue of staff or himself having those documents at the Delaware home from the time that he was still vice president all the way through the time of their being discovered. And finally, another theory that we walk through in the report is that there were 2 folders of marked classified documents relating to Afghanistan found in the box in the president's Delaware garage. One of them contained national defense information, and the other, it would be a more difficult task to persuade a jury that it did contain national defense information. So that argument would be premised on perhaps the president was referring to the one folder that didn't contain national defense information, but was not. It would be difficult for the government to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he possessed the one that did contain national defense information. So I just laid a lot on you there, but we do our best to explain that at some length in the report.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentlelady from Texas recognized.
I thank you. There's been a lot of time being shared, Mr. Chairman. I asked your very brief indulgence.
Wait. You got a unanimous consent, or you asking a question?
Your brief indulgence on unanimous consent dash question.
No. You can do a unanimous consent request, but you don't get to get another round. Someone comes to yield you time, but I don't think they can do that because everyone on the Democrat side has taken their time.
How did you-
You know that I
How did you
appreciate
count
the
them down?
gentlelady from Texas, but you
Yes.
don't get to go 2 rounds.
I'm not trying to go 2 rounds, but
You
let
got a
me.
unanimous consent request you want in the record, state so. If not, then
I am
close
getting
today's
ready
hearing.
to do the unanimous consent request, hoping that someone would come through the door. I ask unanimous consent.
it could only be a Republican because all the Democrats have spoken.
I ask unanimous consent that we add to the record as stated from page 1 of the executive summary. We conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter. We would reach the same conclusion even if the Department of
objection.
Justice policy did not foreclose
think the committee
criminal
knows what's
charges
in the
against the sitting
report.
president.
You
I ask
got the
unanimous
report.
consent that that sentence be put in. And secondarily, I ask unanimous consent and a
Unanimous
reference.
consent to add something to the record that's already in the record. God bless you. We'll do it.
Thank you. And I add, with the emphasis of Sheila Jackson Lee, it does not have. And I particularly ask that this be added to the record that Mr. Hur stated that Biden couldn't recall when his son Beau died. I add unanimous consent out of an article in Politico and indicate that there was no mercy given to Mr. Biden and no mercy given to him in the decision
Without
of this report.
objection, so entered. Mr. Hur, even though there wasn't a question there, do you want to respond to any of that?
No, Chairman.
All right. Mr. Hur, we want to thank you
Thank
for
you. I
being
yield
here
back.
today. And we wish the best to you and your family. This concludes today's hearing. We thank our witnesses for appearing before the committee today without objection. All members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witness or additional materials for the record. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.